Hello, everybody watching in the virtual world and all of our friends here in person. I'd like to welcome you all to the Washington Park Media Center, a hub for media production, strategy, and training. They're hosting us today and making this stream possible, so please show them some love, like and subscribe and all that social media stuff that I'm not super familiar with. I also would like to thank the Milwaukee Arts Board for helping make this possible too, and for everybody that's been listening in. We're really trying to make this an opportunity for artists and creatives of all ages, all abilities, all kind of points in their career to explore and hear from people doing tons of different things in the arts. Creativity is something we all have. There's so many different ways we can use it, and I think now more than ever we need to rely on that knowledge sharing, that support, that mentorship that we've come to found in these interviews and discussions has meant so much to creatives, and hopefully means something to you. And if you're out there watching by yourself and you're wondering, how do I get involved? There's plenty of resources, organizations like Artists Working in Education that I'm here with, as well as people in the room, so come join us. I'm Brett Henzig, and I'm here today with Symphony Swan-Zawadi. So thank you so much.
Hi.
And my first question is feeling a little stale to me because I've been asking it a few times now, but it's the question that I feel like I've always wanted to be asked because it's hard for somebody to put a label on you, to define you. And I think in particular, I'm really excited to learn more about you because you have such a wide range of experiences and a resume. So how do you introduce yourself? How do you define yourself? Tell us all those things.
Oh my goodness. I always start off by saying that I am beautifully complex because I do so many things. I don't mind being called an artist because that is what I am, but I am everything from a friend to a wife to a mom to a sister. I'm all the things. A teacher, principal, arts administrator. I am whatever I put my mind to, and so I just rest in that.
I love that. Thank you so much. So, one of the ideas behind this discussion series is to kind of explore that pathway. So how does one person get from point A to point B to point C and then to where you are now and beyond? So to kind of hit on that, what did you want to be when you grew up? When little Symphony was running around, what did you have your mind set on? Where were you aiming?
That's an interesting question. And I don't think I remembered that until recently when I was digging in my archive, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. And I found a drawing and a journal entry where I always said I wanted to have my own arts community center. So it's odd that my career and my work and life's work has taken me kind of full circle in a way. But I think if I had answered that question maybe even a year ago, it would have just been an art teacher. I just wanted to be around art, or maybe an artist. But my parents always told me that, you're not going to be a starving artist, so you got to figure out a career path in that. And so I became an art teacher.
So I'm glad you said that too, because I think a lot of folks can relate to that. Like, what are you going to do with art? And it kind of feels like you maybe had to mine that out a little bit. So at what point did you kind of come to that conclusion of art teacher? Like, what kind of guided you towards that?
Yeah, that's another great question, because I had the pressure of my parents who were like, you better figure out something else. You can do art on the side, but I need you to pick a real career, right? So my first year in college, my major was pre-dentistry. What?
I thank you for saying that, because that was my reaction.
I was like...
I don't know what that is.
I struggled in math and science all of high school, and so to pick that as a major it's laughable now. But I did a semester and was completely miserable, and then I just decided I'm going to be an art teacher. And so the second semester I switched my major, and then I was back around art, and I knew that at minimal I was going to leave college with a degree to be able to teach art.
Now that I'm thinking about it, though, some of my most interesting art conversations have happened with dentists because they're using Dremel tools to carve things, and then the alginate to make the molds.
I didn't even make it that
so
far. I couldn't even get through the math and science stuff, and I was just like, I am miserable. I need to. And I would see the art folks on campus, and I'm just looking at them oh, I wish I had my art portfolio box and stuff. And so, yeah.
How did your folks respond to that then? Were they supportive of that switch, that you kind of found that? Or
Yeah.
was it more like...
Because I don't think they heard the art, they just heard teacher. And so they like, okay, at minimal, you could be a teacher. And actually in my family, I come from a family of teachers. And so that felt very comfortable to them. Like, all right, cool. You know, your aunt's a teacher, your uncle's a teacher or was a teacher. And so that was cool. I don't think though, I didn't have a lot of exposure in what careers fall into art. And I think now that I know a lot more, I probably would have went for something different, but I didn't know that these careers existed. And so that is what I hope for young people like you all, that there are so many different careers in the arts, and you're doing a great job at being exposed to different stuff now because you can translate that in college later.
Yeah, and then you're not footing the bill for education costs and
Yes.
time and energy. What, so, you know, you had that art teacher path, you know, you were on that trajectory. Had you had any exposure to what it, like, for real meant to be an artist before that? Because I can relate to that idea of, like, I want to be an artist because artists make art.
Yeah.
But then that reality of, like, oh, artists, you know, do this, they do that, they have this business side of it. Like, do you feel like you had a touch point to that experience or a mentor in that way?
No, I mean, outside of my dad being an artist, and not even in the traditional sense, my dad was a self-taught photographer and woodworker, and so I didn't know that he was a self-taught photographer until I was an adult. I just thought he was just taking photos, but I knew that if ever I needed a desk or something built, we were at Menards every Saturday, like getting the materials, and he was in the basement hammering it out. But I didn't call that art. I just thought he was just cool and could build stuff, but it's definitely an art. I didn't get a chance to participate in programs like AWE or other programs because I don't know if it existed, but also I fell into this gap of like not being first generation. And so that knocked me out of a lot of opportunities. And so I just knew that I loved art, and I just took advantage of being in art classes at school.
Excellent. And I'm interested in that idea of the creative family sort of thing too, because I think that does play into what you're doing with your nonprofit, with your arts organization, but also that idea of how your creative family projected that, or maybe not, to you. So you were saying you didn't necessarily consider what your father was doing art. Did they consider it art? How did they kind of show that to you as a young person?
Well, I grew up before social media and cell phones, so y'all are probably like, what did life look like back then? And I couldn't watch TV either. We had like an hour a day that we could watch TV.
Screen time before the touch screen.
Before that stuff, right? And so literally my dad would go to 7 Mile Fair and get all the cheap art supplies, paper, crayons, oil pastels were a favorite, and watercolor. And Payless shoe boxes. And Payless was a shoe store back in the day, like a cheap shoe store. And he would always just say, go figure it out. You know, so I'm like, Daddy, I want a dollhouse. Go figure it out. So I would take shoe boxes and like glue them together and like cut doors out of it and glue construction paper, you know. And so he created space for us to imagine. And I think that is what created the artist in me, because I always just had to figure it out. That was what he would say that. And, you know, it does no good for you to sit around and watch like the rich people on TV figure out how to do whatever it is they're doing so that you can be rich was also another thing he would say.
That's I think that message is even more important in social media era, right? Because so many people that we follow that are influencers, you know, have that access to resources or wealth, or it's generated from being that influencer. So figuring it out in your own way is a very important part of it.
Yeah, learning how to problem solve, right? Because, you know, I learned that Elmer's glue was not the best glue to use when you were trying to glue cardboard together. And so I had to figure out other solutions to problems that were presented in front of me. And I think to the disadvantage of like your generation is that y'all see a lot of time-lapse videos online, and it kind of tricks your brain to think that like cool stuff happens really fast, and it doesn't. You know, like sometimes it takes you making a lot of mistakes, you being frustrated and putting it down and coming back to it days later. And I think that's where the actual magic happens, is when you are stuck and you have to figure out how to solve the problem.
Thinking about dollhouses too, maybe we jump into what you're doing with the actual house right now. So can you share a little bit about what that is? And then I'm thinking, where's that element of play? You know, because you kind of have, I don't want to say a blank slate necessary, but you're in control. You're the head person at this.
Yeah,
you know? So like being able to glue whatever you want down and put whatever color paper, right?
So thinking about the stories I've shared already about like how I grew up and my dad and my mom creating space for me to just make stuff and do stuff. When my father passed away 3 years ago, I was forced to make a decision about what to do with this house that I grew up in, right? I hadn't been to this house in, I don't know, 10 years, and to come back to a place that I have vivid memories of like being that little girl making shoe boxes, you know, doll houses. I was really forced with like, what happens next? And I had a dream from my dad where he told me not to sell the house. So now I'm really confused because I'm like, well, what am I going to do with this? It's 98 years old, so it's not like a new house. And so I went to the house. And one of the first things I noticed was in the threshold of a door were all these little marks from our birthday, where every birthday he would like line us up against the wall and like mark our height. And I was like, dang, you know, after, 30 years, excuse me, after 30 years, all of the other changes in the house, he didn't paint over that. And that felt really special. And then I went to the attic. As a kid, I was not allowed to go there. And so when he died, it was like a world that I had never seen before. It was like all of his photography equipment, all of his cameras were still there. And it felt like his studio. And so to see that part of him, I was like, ooh, this is why he wanted me to not sell the house. Like, I have to do something with all these beautiful artifacts, turntables, cassette tapes, cassette player. All of this stuff was just here. And I'm like, what? How do I activate this? Mm-hmm. And so I formed the Creative House. And the Creative House our mission is to create space for radical imagination, support, and collaboration. And so it's just really answering the question, like, what if this house could heal, could create, and could activate space for Black and brown artists in Milwaukee on the north side. So that's what y'all see right here, is a side view of the Creative House. And then here, so much like y'all, I'm a millennial, so I get to remember life without cell phones and then life with cell phones. And I be telling all my business online. And so as I'm like trying to figure out what to do with this house, I'm also sharing online, like, oh my God, I have this house. Like, I need help with everything. I need help cleaning out the trash. I need help figuring out stuff. And so we would do community service days. And this is a snapshot. This is my daughter. So it's wild that now my daughter, my father's granddaughter, is in the same house that I grew up in, but her relationship to it is totally different. To her, it's an art studio already. For me, this is where I remember Christmas trees being in this corner, TV, whatever. And so we're seeing here transforming the old green paint that my dad had to paint it all white for the gallery space. And so we had members of the community who were like, I believe in what you're doing. You're not crazy. How can I support? And so that's what you see here.
I love that idea too of like the house as creative space, as art. It kind of speaks to, I think through most of human history, our places of home were decorated. They were art.
Mm-hmm.
You go back to like the early, prehistoric cave people times, right? And you're putting the animals, the handprints, right? Yeah. But even more recently too, you're painting right on the walls. Mm-hmm. And I want to say only more modern era where people are kind of thinking of like, what am I going to do with this to sell it? How am I going to keep it nice so that I can pass it on and receive the financial reward from it versus preserving it as legacy, as a place of home, as a place of community, right?
Yeah, and I think also thinking about the complicated history of Milwaukee, which is why I wore this shirt today, because it was a project that talks about the fair housing marches in Milwaukee and thinking about how Black folks had barriers to home ownership. And so that felt really special that, like, I'm not giving this house up. It's going to be in the family, but it's also serving community. And so, yeah, when you think about places of belonging, I wanted a space for artists to feel like they belong, where they can rest, where they can be creative, where they can make mistakes. Because no shade to some of our local arts institutions, sometimes it could be intimidating if you're a young artist new to the field and you're trying to bring in your work and you may feel like, I don't know if I deserve to be here. I don't know if my work is good enough. And here, this is a place where you can come in and you may not have the big fancy portfolio to carry your work in, but you have beautiful work. And how do we activate it? How do we create space for it? That's the purpose.
Well, and that's also too, so many institutions are built on those legacies of exclusion and oppression and things, that having something that's made particularly without those barriers in mind, not just the intimidation factor, but.
And I may never have $1 million coming my way to start an institution, right? That's just whatever, maybe. But I know that I have this house, and I know that in those 4 walls, I can create the environment, the world that I want to see. Yeah.
When thinking about that idea of time too, you know, the comment about how you have to make mistakes, you have to kind of push through, from your conception to where it is now, what do you feel like some of the learning moments were if someone else is thinking, how do I go down this path?
Yeah.
What were some of those areas that were maybe surprises to you that said like, okay, I wasn't picturing this, but I'm shifting. This feels right.
So I graduated from Rufus King. Shout out to the Rufus King folks in the audience. Whoop, whoop. And I was full IB at King. So if you are familiar with that, like my world was always school. So when I got to college, I was like, bet, this is easy. I've been doing this since high school. But it took me 6 years to graduate from college because I was so focused on everything but school, right? And so that was the first mistake of like just doing the most. Then I get into my first big girl job. No, I didn't actually. You need to take a license to be an art teacher. I had to take that test 6 times before I could get my license to teach. So that meant I graduated college. I was not yet eligible to apply for a teaching position. What do? So then I became a public ally for a year. And so I worked in the community. I learned about nonprofits. I increased the capacity of this organization. And then I passed my test. So then I was a teacher for a bunch of years. And then I decided that the principals at the schools that I was working at, they sucked bad. They did not advocate for young people. And I was like, this is not cool. And so I went to get my master's to be a principal. So then I became a principal, and I'm like advocating for young people. Like they need to be more creative. They need more time to just be like, we can't just focus on the school, like the academics all the time. And then the pandemic came, and I was stressed. And then I became unemployed for a little bit, and I was trying to figure it out. And then I got into arts nonprofit. And so I was like, yes, I'm around art. I'm around education. This feels good. And then I decided that I needed to change it again. So I'm saying all of this to say that like there is no one straight path. I think you may have your eyes set on a goal, but along the way, all of the different jobs that I held made it possible for me to start the Creative House. All the skills I learned along the way made it easy for me to start the Creative House. And so I just had to learn to allow myself to be open to the change, because all of those skill sets have now created, me.
Sure. I'm going to throw it.
That was a long answer, but I'm sorry.
That's a beautiful answer. And that's, kind of the thing we've been saying throughout all these discussions is that, you don't know where things are going to shift. Things can change on a dime, right? And I'm going to feel free to pass on this one. But considering all the change in our American, our life in the United States of America, I want to make that distinction. Americas are much bigger. In our country, things are changing every other day, it seems like, right? If you could bring in another skill set, we're talking about you're kind of like finding different paths, building those skills for the Creative House. What do you think, what skill set would you need to bring in, or what skill set do you feel like you're going to be needing to make it through, our current times into the next phase?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think my job right now is to just center my joy, because literally that's an act of resistance. And so the skill set that I need is to continue to keep that at the forefront. The politics suck right now, yes, but I'm focused on creating a space for rest for the artist. And so that, and then also like, this is a nonprofit organization and I need money. So fundraising. Yeah.
I love that you have that visionary answer and then that pragmatic answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one thing that I want to, I don't want to like put this upon you, but from what I heard it seems like that self-determination is part of your pathway. You know, it's almost like you get into a position, you get into a place, you get into that moment, you start seeing what needs improvement, and you do it. You know, you get that principal, you know, position, and you enact that change. And I think that's a pretty bold, you know, will I say, like, leadership is maybe a central skill to what you're doing too?
Yeah, and I firmly believe that leaders can be taught. I think that you just have to have the right people behind you. I was going to say earlier too, the reason why I was able to kind of get all of these jobs, and I didn't mention this before, was every job that I've had for the most part have come because someone else said my name in the room. So I rarely have had to like apply for a position and wait for them to call me back. It's always been, ring, ring. Are you Symphony? Hi, someone said that you would be great for this position. Are you looking for a new job? And I'm like, actually, yes, let's talk. That has been like 99% of the jobs that I've held. And so that is because good character and building your network. I started building my network when I was y'all age in high school. Every relationship that I had with my teachers, in programs, my coaches were all like high, you know, integrity, like foundation built relationships. And so even in college, one of the pieces of advice that I got that I'll share to you all, because it matters now, is put yourself in an environment where you see yourself in the future, because that is going to benefit you later on. So for instance, a lot of time, and no shade at all, but a lot of times when you get to college or when you're in high school, you're working gigs like fast food, the mall, whatever. But I worked jobs that were at least in the arts or in education. And so by the time I was ready to get a big girl job, I had contacts in the school, or I knew someone who knew somebody, so that I could say, hey, here's my resume. I'm like, I finally got my license. Can you just pass this along? And so that helped out a lot in like getting to where I am.
And that kind of speaks to that, like setting the course, but not
being so
the granular plan. Or,
yeah, I'm not saying don't set a plan. Like, you don't want chaos, but you can have your eyes set on a goal, but be flexible for the route.
Chaos comes to you too.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, you know, it took me 6 years to graduate. That was chaos. My parents were like, what's happening?
Well, and it kind of leads me to the next question too. What do you picture the Creative House being in like 10 years, maybe like 30 years, 40, 50, you know, like do you have a vision for 100 years? And I like getting weird with this question too. So if you want to say, okay, rockets to the moon, you know, like go for it.
No, I'm going to give you 5 years, because hell, 30 years,
That's
we might not,
plan, right?
we might not be here. So where it's situated on the north side of Milwaukee, right across the street from the house, was an old cleaners back in the day. It is not that now. I don't know what it is. It's just a building. But I have my eyes set on being able to purchase that so that we can extend our work. 2 blocks west of where the Creative House is an old Lutheran church. It takes up 2 blocks. I want that building too. And so I envision like this just being a stepping stone to showing how you can activate community, how you can get people involved, and how you can help people see what happens when you create space for radical imagination. I see a place where we're having art shows for artists in the city, where artists are positioning themselves as experts. I have a phrase where I fundamentally believe artists can help solve complex problems. And from all the tables that I've been able to sit at in my career, what typically ends up happening is you have the so-called experts who are trying to figure out a problem. And then at the end, they're like, okay, and now we're going to bring in the artist. Can you make a mural? And we're like, that is like a gross misuse of the capacity of like artists. And so I believe that artists who are serious about their work, who are really trying to like solve a thing with their practice or their curiosity, should be at the table at the beginning with all of the other experts. And so I want the Creative House to be a platform for artists to say, here's what my practice is questioning. Here are other experts that are also in the field. And our exhibition is going to be a groundbreaking opportunity for us to have deeper conversations so that we can help solve the problem. Also, at the same time, it has an archive. So all of the things that are in the attic of this house that my father kept, I want to continue to collect artifacts from folks that are in Milwaukee, specifically Black and brown communities, because I want it to be an opportunity to shift the narrative. There, you know, the north side of Milwaukee has its bad rep, whatever, but it also has been historically taken out of funding opportunities, investment opportunities. And so how do we collect the stories of people who've owned a home for 40 years, who have been in the community? How do we collect the stories and the artifacts of things of, like, you know, traditional block parties that happen every year that have been happening? We need to tell those stories so that people don't just think, oh, the north side, they don't care, because that's not true. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like a twofold thing, but in 5 years, I'm hoping that we can at least own the building across the street, and continue to create opportunities in the first district of Milwaukee. And so that's what I'm working towards.
That's amazing. I love that. And I like, as a person who studied sculpture and really loves 3D, you know, you keep coming back to these ideas of physicality in the objects, you know, the marks on the wall, the objects in the archive, right? So, you know, you're not just, you were speaking before about art is so many different things, right? And it's not just like the thing, but it's the place. It's irradiating out from the house throughout the neighborhood, like with the power of art. Yeah.
So talk about the different careers in art. When I was a kid, young person, I thought that, you know, a career in the art meant you were locked in your studio and you had all these cans of paint and brushes everywhere, and that was an artist. But really, it's so much. It's dancers, writers, poets, playwrights, the folks who are behind the camera, filmmakers. All of those disciplines could also make you an artist, right? And let's say you're like, well, I don't really like doing any of those things, but let's say you're great at research and you love history. Okay, you could be a curator. You can help put on exhibitions and design the experience. Well, you know, I don't like any of that. Well, they have art preparators, you know, people who are actually preparing and taking care of the work. There are so many careers that I didn't know existed. And so that is what I want the house to be able to create, space for people to have access to those things. And then take it from there.
When you're honoring too the creativity of all those other fields, and like you're mentioning too about researchers and scientists, you know, right? Like there was a time when it was all just lumped together. You know, you were just a person who was curious, and sometimes you drew about it, sometimes you wrote about it, sometimes you spoke about it. And I also too love that, you know, acknowledging that the history writers are writing stories. They're taking bits and pieces, they're putting it together, and in a way, by collecting the archival material, you know, you're allowing more access to that, or, you know, you yourself taking control of that narrative.
But for y'all who are taking notes, like, there are so many examples of people in Milwaukee who are like, this is my thing, and I don't want to work for anyone else, and so I'm going to build what I want to see. When I think about writers, I think about like Dasha Kelly, who has been able to like take her love of poetry and writing and build shows. So now she gets paid to go to universities and like produce these beautiful written shows. I think about like Classic, who is an amazing musician and producer, whatever. He creates these experiences for people and gets paid to do that. And so I think when you're tapped into whatever your skill set is and you believe in it, you'll find a way to like make it work.
Well, I think Milwaukee is a really unique place for that too, because you know, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, you know, the funding for the arts isn't what it is in a lot of other places. The size of the city, the size of the network isn't what it is if you go to the East Coast or the West Coast. You know, like you're not probably going to get discovered in the traditional sense, but it's a perfect size for building your own thing. And there's that pragmatism, that grit of saying like you can do it. You got to do it though.
There's a photo in the slide deck where we're in the creative house and there's like people sitting around the table. This place could be subjective, right? You can say, you know, I may not ever go to New York and make it big, or LA, whatever. But if you are thinking creatively and deeply about whatever your thing is, you can build your network even while you're here in Milwaukee. So while I'm telling all my business online and storytelling about the work, the daydreams, the imagination things I have for the creative house, people were starting to find me online. And so one day, this guy right here in the yellow, Jalen, inboxed me on Instagram and said, hey, I'm going to be in town. Can I stop by the creative house? I didn't know this guy from a can of paint. He could have been, you know, crazy or whatever. But I was like, yep, I'll meet you there. He gets there and he brought his fiance. And I find out that they're archivists and memory workers from Chicago. They were in Milwaukee and they had been hearing about this creative house in Milwaukee online. I have no idea how they initially found out about the work I was doing, But, social media works in mysterious ways. 2 weeks later, he was like, hey, we're back in Milwaukee again, and we want to bring some more people to the house. So I'm like, okay, great. So these two artists are from Texas, I believe. They started a tech company called Kenkofa, which helps Black folks with memory keeping and archiving their history and their stories. And so these folks have been all over Afrotech, and they're doing all these cool, amazing things, and they're in the creative house, like in Milwaukee. And so I didn't have to leave my city to build a network. I just continue to be consistent with how I'm sharing my story, and people are starting to find it. And now they're like huge fans of my work. And so I say that to say, you may not have a desire to leave Milwaukee, but that doesn't stop you from taking your work outside of Milwaukee. And so that's just my encouragement. I was really excited about having these people in Milwaukee who didn't think that this crazy girl who was trying to transform a house was actually crazy, but thought it was brilliant. And so, yeah.
That speaks, though, too, like when you're surrounded by people who might not share that vision or see that vision or maybe understand the individual enough that sometimes you got to cast that net a little wider, too,
you got to find your people, right? And I learned early on that just because, like, you're my friend, you may not be my ideal customer. And so that's okay. Like we could be great friends, but you don't really like art for real, no pressure. And so I had to extend a wider net, like you said, to find people who are interested in how do we activate memory? How do we preserve objects from families? And once I did, it's been a joy. Yeah.
I got a couple questions for you because we haven't even dug into your personal work.
And
I think this next question might touch into that too. What have you noticed a change in archive, working intergenerationally, right? So, the archives that your father kept, I'm guessing like traditional films, slides, photo prints, right? Cassettes you mentioned and vinyl and all that, right? Does that play into the story, or like, do you feel like there's problems with the way we keep media or archives? And kind of what would be your recommendation for somebody who might hear this and say, I need to get on this, my family's got stuff, or I've got a story, a narrative I want to share?
That's a good question. I think if you had asked me right out of college what type of artist I was, I would have told you a painter. Like, that is full stop. And then life happened, and I got exposed to different types of art making, and then I kind of fell into being a printmaker. Because in college, I hated printmaking. I was like, this sucks. I don't want to do anything with this. It's stupid. And then here I am, like, cutting linoleum and running things through a press. But I think I had to lose my parents in order to find value in the things that they left behind. And so I don't know if that's like a precursor or a prerequisite to the archiving work. But what I do know is there are institutions in the city of Milwaukee who are, like, their mission is to storytell and collect and keep these stories. But when it comes to Black folks, it's not as urgent. They're not as meticulous. And so that sucks, And when you call up a place and you're like, hey, can you tell me all the history you have about the King Center or any other place? And they're like, oh, we got 2 newspaper articles. I'm like, it's been around 50 years. That's it, And it's like, how do I begin to kind of collect these things so that if someone else wants to call about the Washington Park Media Center or whatever 20 years from now, they have the work of like the folks who are, you got to think about the future, really. So my work now has shifted to how do I create space to use old photos with new photos and thinking about the future. So I like to play with layers because I feel like when you look at something old, you're thinking about the present and then you're thinking about the future. And how do I illustrate that in my artwork?
I love it. Do you have any particular piece that you'd like to talk a little bit more about?
Yeah, can you go to the one where it says the son came as a grandson or something like that? It's like this one. This is one of my favorite pieces. I did this one in 2023. And what I love about it is this was one of the photos that I found from my father's photography collection. And it's an old archival photo of him holding me. And Growing up, my dad was born in the 50s. And so if you think about what life was like for black men in Milwaukee in the 50s, they used a lot of very heavy gendered language, and you were not seen as, like, I don't know, successful maybe unless you had a son. So he did not have a son. He had 2 daughters, and all the time he would just say, like, man, I wish I had a son. And I'm like, but I play all the sports. I do all the things, a son would do. I'm right here. And so I titled this piece, "The Son He Never Had Came as a Grandson," because when he passed, he had 2 grandsons. So I'm like, see, you had 2 sons, And so just a conversation about that past, present, future kind of thing, because that's my son, present day, and these are 2 like duplicates of me and my dad.
I feel that sentiment. I mean, I think it pops up in so many different ways, how one generation moves to the next, and the vision, and like you're saying, language even too, but also just that kind of like who you're expected to be, and how you kind of work towards that. Can you tell me a little bit about the future with this one?
With this one?
So if I'm picturing more layers going forward in time, what's your hope for that, for the grandsons, and how maybe they engage and interact in that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think also being that, he graduated high school in the 70s, they were very conditioned to like believe your worth is tied to how much money you make and like what job you hold. And so I'm hoping that with my husband and I are raising our son, that he can be more tender. And he is tender. He's like, look at this smile. Y'all see this smile? Ain't that just like the cutest little thing ever? It just makes you just feel so warm inside. He's the kind of kid who will bring me like a handful of like daffodils and say, here, mommy, And so I think that feels like a elevation in terms of like maybe how he was raised. And I also think that, and he's allowed to be an artist. I don't think my dad was, which is why I think it was in the attic, locked away. No one could see it. And so I wonder sometimes what my dad would have been had he been allowed to like really lean into his photography and really lean into his woodworking. But he was so consumed with like being a provider that he wasn't able to access that side of his humanity. He will have access to all of that.
I love that. That's, I think, what every parent wants,
Yeah.
is, to undo some of that, rebuild. I just love that metaphor too with what you're doing with the home, that idea that you're providing that platform for a future, not just your family, but the communities you want to welcome into your space.
There's another photo of a house collage in here. This one. Home is place. I made this one because my parents split when we were in like middle school, so like 11 or 12 or something. And so I was torn between dad's house and mom's house. And so there was this like tension between like what place was home, and they both were home, but having to be re-engaging with the creative house, it started to bring up some really complicated feelings of like, where did I feel most safe? Where was I allowed to create? And so I wanted to explore that with this piece here. Yeah.
And with your work too, so is your work archive in itself? Is your work expression? How the work is so personal, but at the same time, it's also this universal thing, and it's this kind of shared.
Yeah.
I mean, all art is to some degree, but when I think about that, these are your families, your face, literally in this. These are artifacts that you've pulled.
Yeah.
How do you connect with your work that way? How do you feel about it? Do you sell your work? Is it so personal?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, the last couple of years, I've been so focused on building this arts institution where I was really down on myself because I'm like, dang, I don't have like a fresh body of work. And to my friends reminded me, like, building this creative house is a body of work. And so I had to shift my thinking about that. And so lately, the work that has gone into branding and building and getting community support is my practice these days. But when I am making art, which I'm back in the studio, woo woo, I use my access to the photos I have from my personal family's archive, and I do sell my work. And it's personal, but I think what I've learned along the journey of my life is one, I only share what I've already overcome. So it's not like a daggering point for me to share a thing because I've kind of healed from it. And two, because I was able to share, I was able to create a bridge between someone else who maybe is already experiencing that and can feel seen. And so that is what motivates me to use my own work, because it helps someone else see themselves.
I love that. I've never heard it positioned in that way, that, you know, you share what you've went through or what you've kind of processed.
Yeah.
Because I feel like in my studio practice, and also I feel like, at least personally, what I appreciate about art, it can't be too tame. You know, it has to have that personal meaning, or that passion or fire or emotion, that expression, that real genuine expression.
Yeah.
And it's hard to, I think, as an artist, know how close you are to something and whether or not it's something you can pass along. And when I work with young people and teens, and, you know, when you're at that point in your creation, when you are putting that expression in there, it can be hard to let go of that.
Yeah. And I think I've learned to not hold everything as precious, because that stops me from wanting to make work. If everything is like, oh my God, this is so perfect, and I don't want to make it and move on, because that's the only way to build a body of work. Yeah.
Do you, when you're collecting archive, right, when you're pulling that stuff out, do you feel like you're making judgment calls that maybe your family would have made, you know, when you're looking at those things? Because I hear you talking about that with your work, but then I'm thinking about your family, your children, and whether or not they might look back and say, oh, I wish Mom wouldn't have sold that one. You know what I mean?
No, that's a good call. And when it comes to archiving, like, one, you can go to college to be an archivist, which, again, I didn't know. It's called like library science, and you can do all of that stuff. I didn't know that existed. I didn't know that was a thing. So everything that I'm learning now is just because I put myself in proximity to people who are in the field. But everything that is in the archive right now is there because I feel like it tells a story, like it contributes to the greater story of like honoring the contributions of Black and brown families in Milwaukee. Now, there are things in the archive that feel extremely personal, and if they were alive and I even thought about sharing it, I would get like, psh. So that stuff just stays put away. So I do practice discretion there, but I am largely more interested in like, how does this artifact contribute to the larger goal of the archive? And that's what gets, you know, added.
Okay, excellent. I love that. There's so much interplay between the work that you're making and, you know, the archives that you're collecting too.
Yeah.
I've been personally wondering about that. So
yeah, I mean, it's a toss up, you know, like there are some things that, how do I say it? The goal is not to only present, when you think about legacy, right? People tend to always say or present the best of a person. And I don't think that's my intent. Like, there are artifacts in here that show our estranged relationship as an adult, and we talk about that. And so, yeah, good, bad, or indifferent, we're still trying to, you know, tell these, you know, powerful stories.
Yeah, well, and that speaks to that macro level of like how you tell the history of entities, organizations, nations. You know, you got to confront all of it because it's all part of the story.
Exactly.
But you don't always have to.
I keep the dignity in mind. Maybe that's the word.
Yeah. Thank you for finding that.
Yeah.
Dignity is a huge word in general. So I had so many more questions.
Are we at time?
We are not at. We're getting there. We're getting there.
Wow.
But I appreciate it. I'm gonna take one of the questions, and I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh, okay.
I like to ask. If you were to be able to wave a magic wand and change something going on with the art scene in Milwaukee, what would it be? But if you don't mind, in the time we got left before questions, could we hit on the art scene, maybe the school systems, and maybe community in general, and storytelling and archiving? Yeah.
If I could wave a magical wand for some of the larger institutions in the city, I would make it so that they had to reallocate funds to smaller organizations, like grassroots organizations. So that's one. I think when we talk about like the educational scene, I think there was something that could have been really beautiful that happened during the pandemic. During the pandemic, there were like these abbreviated school schedules. They included more time for social emotional learning. It was more project based, and it was shorter days. All the things that like teachers who are in the field are like advocating for and no one's listening to. And then as soon as they had an opportunity to go back to normal, they forgot about all these things. And so I think if I could like wave a magical wand for that, I would have it so that schools reflect that again, because I think that is what is missing. And you said the archiving world, is that what you mean?
Yeah, or any collecting of things to tell the stories, to preserve the legacies. If I could wave a magical wand there, I would love to be able to set up like satellite sites to do community, I don't know, like Adam Carr calls it, like I think history digs or something, because I want to be able to create space for families to bring their photos and then have them contribute to the archive, their stories in a way, not take it, but like we'll scan it and then we'll have it live in the creative house as a way. I would love to do that. And I'm working on that, but like if I had capacity and volunteers to kind of help orchestrate that, that's what I would do most immediately. And then I just think that every community, every neighborhood in Milwaukee should have third spaces for people to be able to express and create without the obligation to spend money. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's, so with all of these abandoned homes in Milwaukee, what would it look like for artists to get access to those to activate in the same way that the creative house is being activated? What would that do for community? Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
I want to get you that wand. I think that's and let me I want to ask too, what you've done so much, right? And I know that the creative house is kind of your current mission, vision, but I want to broaden it a little bit, and if you could share kind of like throughout your I'm going to say creative career path, because you've maintained that.
Yeah.
Could you share points of pride? Like, what were you most proud of when you were in the classroom? What were you most proud of when you were a principal? What were you most proud of when you were in the nonprofit sector?
I was most proud when I was a classroom teacher, when young people will come into my class and say to me, this is the best class of like my schedule. When I would have young people who were like knocking at my door because they had a free moment in class and would choose to want to hang out in my room. That was really important to me because it was a safe place. So that was really important. And that was like, or when the students would complete projects and feel proud of themselves. I was always like, see, I told you could do it. When I was a principal, I was most proud of, I had a student who wrote me, he was a middle schooler. He was like maybe 6th or 7th grade. And he was like pissed because middle school students didn't get recess anymore. And
that's so sweet.
He wrote me this like long letter with like supporting evidence and I don't know, reason. I don't know. It was dope. And so I was like, you know what? You're right. And so I met with the teachers and we were able to kind of figure out time for them to get some time outdoors every day. And that felt really good because it was like this young person was like, listen, this is what we need. And I was able to help move some systems around to make sure that happened. So that was like the whole point, I think, of being a principal. In nonprofit, I'm most proud of being able to, one, support artists of color working in institutions that sometimes or historically caused harm. And so I was able to be like a barrier between, artists and organization. So that felt really good. And then also being able to design cool programs that you see people engaging when you leave the organization. So that feels good too. Yeah.
Excellent. And lastly, because I think we do need to leave a little bit of time for questions.
Yes, because I need at least 3 friends.
We're calling you out. If you were a young person who was listening today, and when I say young person, I mean maybe a young person, but also somebody who wants to get involved in the arts.
Yeah.
It might be twice your age, but wants to get involved somehow, somewhere. Where would you recommend that they start, especially if they're not that person who has that clear path, right? And has that drive or the
Yeah.
vision to kind of like build their own thing.
I get that question all the time, actually,
Okay.
of like, hey, I've always loved art. Like, what do you recommend? I recommend you just finding where artists hang out in the city and just be there. Because I think once you're around artists, something magical always happens where you find exactly what you need. But then I also share resources like, you know, Arts at Large and Artists Working in Education and all of these other arts institutions that offer opportunities for you all to connect or engage with classes. That always helps. But really, it's overcoming the fear and doing it scared. That's the main thing. Of like, whatever you're thinking about, just do it. And everything that you need after that will find its way to you. But sometimes what stops the thing from finding you is because you don't actually start. So you just got to start.
I love that. That speaks to that intimidation factor that you were saying too. You know, you might not feel comfortable in the space, but overcoming that fear, putting yourself out there. Or what I love about that response too is when, you know, you started this space, right? You know, the
Scared,
artists were
though.
saying to you,
Very scared.
very scared.
Very, very scared.
Are you still scared?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you know, I'm always thinking about like, you know, how am I going to pay for this? How is this going to be sustainable? You know, but I just wake up every day and I do a little bit each day. And, you know, before you know it, you'll have a mountain. And so I just try to focus on the small steps, because if you focus on the mountain, you'll never do it.
That's huge too.
So like today, I sent out emails for sponsorships. That's all I had capacity for. Tomorrow will be something new. But I was scared to start it for sure. And I sat on it for a while before my friends were like, just do it. Like, just ask people to help you clean it out. And then I'm like, ask people to help clean out a dead guy's home? Like, people are going to look at me like I'm crazy. And to my surprise, when I asked, 7 people showed up. You know? And then the next time it was like, oh my God, you started a nonprofit, but you don't have any money and you're not old enough to get funding yet. What do? They said, ask people for money. So I planned a fundraiser, fundraise $5,000. You know what I mean? So it's just like every time I was scared to do a thing and I just got kicked off the ledge and did it, it became something very beautiful.
And who were those people encouraging you? Were they the artists? Or
Yeah.
were they those people that, like, your friends that weren't the artists?
No, these are my artist friends. Like,
That's great.
not my friends, but like artists who I had been in community with and engaging in going to art shows with, who I would tell my dreams to. And they were like, what you waiting on?
And where did that fear come from? Like, do you feel like that was one of those generational things passed on that, you know, you got to do it on your own, don't ask for help, don't ask for handouts?
No, I think it was just like fear of failure, really. Like, okay, I'm going to say this thing out loud, and then what happens if it fails? But I had to learn that, like, I saw, who said this? Was it Pharrell? Maybe it was Pharrell. But really, like, you have to shift how you think about failure, and that is, it's not failure, it's research. And so when I saw that, I was like, okay, I'm not as afraid of failing. And if I fail, we'll just, you know, learn from it and move on. And so I think about that in terms of my life. I always tell people, like, plan A was dope, but I'm like on plan M right now. And it's pretty cool over here too. So, yeah.
Excellent. Okay. I'm totally done now. We're going to open it up for questions.
3 questions
I appreciate
minimally, okay? Oh, we got...
It's not a very good. Okay, it's not the best question. But when you were making the decision to open your father's house up to the public, and you were talking about how that was somewhere where like you would live for a period of time, how did it feel? Like, did you feel like you had to let go of some of your memories there, or like was sharing that space with other people kind of hard?
You know, that's a really actually great question.
I was saying, what are you talking about? That's amazing.
And, you know, for the first year after he passed away, the reason why the progress of like where the house is even today is, you know, to, I guess some standard is like, dang, you should have maybe have gotten further along, was because it was hard to go over there just to like do the cleaning, do the painting, because I was like, oh my God, like I just remember, like I would find little toys from my childhood that he kept. And so that became like, wow, this place is like not going to be this anymore. So that was really hard. But again, I knew that, I always say my dad gave me instructions. Like when he came to my dream and told me not to sell, that was like my first set of instructions. So every time he comes to my dream and tells me to do something or shows me something, I feel like he's leaving little breadcrumbs for me. And so after he told me not to sell, I had a dream that I had people in the house. And so I was like, okay, maybe that was the service day. The most recent dream was an art show was in the space. And so I was like, okay, that's coming next. So when you have a vision, you don't ever get the instructions. You just have this vision. And so I just got to keep working until I achieve that. And I think part of the story of the Creative House is that it was once my childhood home. But now, if you go into the space, the rooms have like art tables in there, and it just looks like a different space. And so now this era of the house is for the community. And so I just rest in that. Yeah. Scaling
it up from your personal experience, amplifying those memories into something for everyone.
Yeah. That was a great question.
Yeah.
You should pat yourself on the back for that.
I got a co-host for next time.
Yes. I need 2 more at least. Yes.
I don't remember if you said this, but what would you say has shaped like your character as an artist the most? Like, was it your community or was it your family?
I think it's a mixture of family and working with young people as an art teacher for a bunch of years. Like, y'all are brilliant. And I think when you get a teacher who recognizes that young people are brilliant, you end up learning so much more from them. And so from all my years of working with young people, I was able to, I don't know, y'all kept me young. And so when I wasn't making work, my students like would literally tell me, yeah, I don't know if I want to do this project because I don't know if you can do it. And I'm like, what? I got to prove to you that I can do this project, you know? And so I would have to like do samples of the project ahead of time so that my students knew that like I was practicing what I could preach. That kept me in the game, you know, that kept my skills sharp. And so that helped my character, but also recognizing that good character would take you further than anything else. When your character is on point and you keep your word and you are kind to people, that comes back tenfold. And so I'm always conscious of that.
I feel like that that group that came from Chicago and then brought their friends back from Texas, you know, like that's a character thing.
Yeah.
And I think the more, I'm sure people have all experienced this no matter what your age, but there's plenty of people doing plenty of cool things. But you might only go there once. You might talk to them once or twice, and then the rest of it's all on social because they're not fun to be around.
Yeah, yeah. So keeping my word is really important, and being kind. Kind doesn't mean nice. So I always tell people to differentiate the two. But yeah. One more, at least. You got one? Period.
So first I just wanted to say the thing that you said about students coming into your room and wanting to spend time with you was really sweet, because I had teachers like that and thoughts like that. Really, I would love to be an art teacher one day. We'll see where I end up, but that's awesome. I want you to take a second to like go full like advertisement mode. What is the Creative House doing right now? Like, what are things that people should show up for? What's the next steps? Like,
Okay.
get it all out there. Promote yourself.
Okay. I love that. Thank you. So here's the deal. If you all on Instagram, that's where Creative House lives. Like all of the in real time stuff happens there. You can follow us on Instagram at the Creative House, all one word. And creative is spelled CR8TV. We actually have a workshop on April 26th with filmmaker and UWM professor Marquise Mays. It's called you know Marquise? Isn't he amazing? We have a series called Unstuck, and it was designed to create space for artists who feel stuck in their practice. It started off as a one-time, like, how do we create space for artists to just learn how to go deeper in their practice? And that's that one picture of like the selfie with me. Can you go to that picture? That was from the workshop. I only expected for like 5 people to show up, and 21 people registered for this event. And it was so great to see. We're in fruition. It's like a selfie. Yes. All of these artists showed up. It was like, I feel stuck in some way in my practice. and I need to create space to kind of figure out what that is. So then people were asking, when's the next one? I'm like, the goal was to do one, but when you find your people, they keep pushing you. So then Marquise Mays reached out and was like, hey, let's do a workshop together. And I want to help people figure out how to experiment and be more comfortable with using film in their practice to document their process or to express themselves. So he's going to lead the session on April 26th. It's free. You all are also able to register and come. And I'm excited about that. We just did a digital archiving pop-up workshop during spring break where folks were able to come bring in their pictures, and I taught them how to scan their images in. We gave them a free database so they can start collecting all of their art, analog stuff and turn them into digital stuff. And then we have our second annual Make Art Artist Award and fundraiser on June 21st. And that started off as me wanting to create a new avenue to celebrate artists in Milwaukee. So typically, you know, you get these big fancy award ceremonies. They always celebrate the same type of people. And I was like, man, screw that. We're going to do our own award ceremony, and we're going to celebrate people who align with the mission of our work. So this year we're awarding Carlise Kelly Vendula. She's an amazing Latin dancer in the city. And we're also honoring V. Adams, who's a content creator, visual artist, and filmmaker. And so we're fundraising. Our goal is to raise $15,000 this year. I don't know which camera is looking at me. So if you are a funder, investor who wants to build and help support the creation of this work, yeah, so those are the two big events. Thank you for sharing that or giving me space to do that. But I would love to engage more young people. And so if you are like really trying to get deeper in your practice and engage community with your practice, follow me on Instagram. That's where you can reach me. And our website is the same, thecreativehouse.org.
I have one from the chat.
Oh, sweet.
So David said, I would like to ask you if you could be any kind of the four elements. Fire, earth, water, or air. Which one would you choose?
Listen, I love me a good avatar question. That is a good question. And I think it would be water. So what's that, the water bender? I love water. Is that an element? Did I answer that right?
Yeah.
Is that, okay, yeah, water. Because I'm a Pisces too, so, you know, you flow. And I feel like I do that. Yeah. Very flexible. Can fit in any container. Go with the flow.
And you got that end in mind, though.
Yeah.
Or you got that path in mind, but you might be flexing to get
there.
there.
It is.
Going to get there. I love it.
Yep.
All right, last chance for any questions before we wrap things up. All right. Well, thank you, Symphony.
Yeah.
And I apologize I didn't give you that. Some of my questions are like, what do you want to share?
Oh.
So
Yeah.
thank you for our audience for suggesting that. I got a little caught up in the conversation.
No,
so thank
that's
you.
cool.
I appreciate it. And yeah, this will be on the Washington Park Media Center's YouTube page, along with all of our other Paint It Forward discussions. Paint It Forward is meant to do that, to show young and early career artists kind of multiple paths forward, different ways of being, but also to build that network. I think Symphony, that was a big part of it, is when you find your people, when you build that network. And networks don't have to be the stuffy
Absolutely
soiree thing where you're handing out business cards and exchanging information. It's being in community with people who share a vision, share some joy, share a way of being. So if you want to be here, we do these once a month. We'll have the schedule posted. Next time we'll be hearing oh my gosh, my schedule's gonna be off. Next time we're hearing from Dina Nord, who is a graphic designer and entrepreneur, as well as an artist themselves, to share those perspectives. So if you have interest in any of those things, please feel free to join us in person or streaming, and stop on by AWE, Washington Park Media Center. We're on the corner of 43rd and Valete here in Milwaukee, just by Washington Park, and we're always activating the spaces in different ways. You can find our information online as well. So anything else, I'll give you that platform. Any final advice, anything you want to share with the world?
Trust yourself. Artists can solve complex problems. Creative House.
Thank you so much.
Yay! I did okay?
Yes.
Yay. Good.